rise to power, and the insane utopia. It all began in April 1975, when the Khmer Rouge group, led by Pol Pot, entered Phnom Penh. Residents greeted them with flowers, believing the civil war was over. But the joy lasted only a few hours. The city was ordered to be evacuated within 3 days. People were lied to, told that the Americans were going to bomb the city. But in reality, Pol Pot wanted to turn the country into a massive agrarian commune. He abolished everything: money, private property, schools, religion, and even family ties. Cambodia was renamed Democratic Kampuchea, and the calendar was reset. It was the start of Year Zero. S-21, prison, Tuol Sleng. The symbol of state terror was a school in the center of Phnom Penh, converted into the secret S-21 prison. It was a literal death factory. Conditions: classrooms were divided into tiny brick or wooden cells slightly larger than a coffin. Prisoners were shackled to the floor and forbidden from speaking or moving without permission. They were fed watery rice porridge twice a day. Torture. The goal of S-21 was not punishment, but confession. People were tortured with electric shocks, drowned in water barrels, had their fingernails pulled out, and were hung upside down. They were forced to sign absurd protocols claiming they worked for the CIA or the KGB. Statistics: between 12,000 and 20,000 people passed through S-21. Only about 12 survived. If a person ended up there, it was a one-way ticket. The killing fields, Chuyung Ek. When the prisons ran out of space, people were taken to the killing fields. To save ammunition, the Khmer Rouge killed people with hoes, pickaxes, axes, or iron rods. The 14 white tombs, the final victims of S-21. Before you stand the gravestones of the last 14 victims discovered on the grounds of the S-21 prison, Tuol Sleng in Phnom Penh. Quick summary number of victims: 14 people. When they were found, January 1979, as Vietnamese troops entered the city. Identities. Their true identities remain unconfirmed to this day. While names have appeared on some graves later, their accuracy is still debated. It is believed they were high-ranking Khmer Rouge officials suspected of treason. Circumstances of the execution. These individuals were murdered just hours before the prison guards, and officials fled the city. The method: to avoid drawing attention with the sound of gunfire, they were not shot. Instead, the victims were shackled to iron bed frames in the rooms of the administrative building and either beaten to death or had their throats slit. The discovery: when Vietnamese soldiers and photographers entered the building, the bodies were still warm. Due to rapid decomposition in the tropical heat and the impossibility of identification at the time, they were buried right there in the prison courtyard. Today, these 14 white gravestones serve as a somber memorial and a reminder of the final, brutal hours of Interrogation Center S-21 before the collapse of Pol Pot's regime. The most horrific spot there is the killing tree, against which executioners beat infants to death in front of their mothers so they wouldn't grow up and take revenge for their parents. All of this happened to the sound of loud propaganda music from loudspeakers to drown out the screams of the dying. Aftermath and the fall of the regime. This nightmare lasted 3 years, 8 months and 20 days, 1975 to 1979. The regime fell only after the intervention of Vietnam. Victims: according to various estimates, between 1.7 and 2.5 million people died, nearly a quarter of the country's population. While people died not only from executions, but also from mass starvation, a total lack of medicine, and grueling labor in the rice fields. Who was targeted? Primarily, the intelligentsia. A person could be killed simply for wearing glasses, implying they could read, or knowing a foreign language. This was an attempt to build an ideal society through the total destruction of the individual, which turned the entire country into one massive graveyard. To this day, there are almost no elderly people in Cambodia. That generation was practically wiped off the face of the earth. A closer look at Pol Pot, the man who turned a nation into a graveyard. The story of Saloth Sar, better known as Pol Pot, is one of the darkest chapters of the 20th century. It is a narrative of how a utopian idea, pushed to the brink of absolute madness, transformed an entire country into a cemetery. Here is the chronology of his life and reign, the journey from a student in Paris to a hermit dictator. The beginning, from Paris to the jungle. It didn't start in a dungeon, but in prestigious classrooms. Saloth Sar was born into a wealthy family, was educated in Cambodia, and even traveled to Paris on a government scholarship. It was there, among circles of left-wing intellectuals, that he became obsessed with Marxism. Upon returning to his homeland, he went underground. In the depths of the jungle, the Khmer Rouge movement was formed. Their ideology was a radical blend of Maoism and fierce nationalism. They dreamed of restoring the greatness of the ancient Angkor Empire by purging the country of corrupt Western influence. Rise to power in year zero. In 1975, after an exhausting civil war, the Khmer Rouge entered Phnom Penh. Residents greeted them with flowers, hoping for peace. But the joy lasted only a few hours. Pol Pot announced Year Zero, a concept where the old world had to be completely destroyed. Evacuation of cities. Millions were driven out of Phnom Penh into the countryside under the pretext of American bombings. In reality, Pol Pot viewed cities as breeding grounds for capitalism. The abolition of everything. The regime banned money, private property, religion, and even the postal service. Cambodia, renamed Democratic Kampuchea, was turned into a closed labor camp. Laws of madness, genocide against intellect. Pol Pot's regime established rules that seem like a nightmare today. The primary enemy was any intellectual. Glasses were a death sentence. People were killed simply for wearing glasses, seen as a sign of literacy, or knowing a foreign language. Communal dining. Cooking at home was forbidden. Everyone had to eat from a communal pot, and picking fruit that fell from a tree was punishable by death. Death for emotions. Love and affection were considered bourgeois remnants. Marriages were assigned by the party, the Angkar, often between total strangers. Those who couldn't keep up with the 12 to 15-hour workdays in the rice fields were sent to interrogation centers, such as the infamous S-21, Tuol Sleng prison. Out of 20,000 prisoners, only a handful survived. The tragic finale and retribution of Pol Pot's rule lasted only 3 years, 8 months and 20 days. But in that time, between 1.7 and 2.5 million people perished, nearly a quarter of the nation's population. The end came in 1979, when Vietnamese forces invaded Cambodia and toppled the regime. Pol Pot, with the remnants of his army, fled back into the jungles near the Thai border. What happened to him? The most tragic part of his story is that he never faced an international court. For nearly 20 years, he hid in the jungle, continuing to command his loyal fanatics. In 1997, his own comrades, weary of his paranoia, placed him under house arrest. On April 15th, 1998, Pol Pot passed away. The official cause was heart failure, but many believe he committed suicide or was poisoned after learning he was to be handed over to an international tribunal. His body was burned on a pile of trash and old tires in the rain. The man who dreamed of eternal greatness ended his days in total isolation, leaving behind a country littered with killing fields. Summary: the story of Pol Pot is a reminder of how fanatical faith in a happy future can be used to justify any atrocity in the present, and how quickly civilization can collapse into primitive chaos under the rule of a tyrant.
Поля смерти в Пномпене. Вообще, на самом деле, специально сюда ехать не нужно, потому что здесь ничего интересного нет. Монумент, который построен в 1988 году в память о десятков тысяч погибших здесь. И вот там вот, друзья, нет, вот там вот там за этой беседкой, сейчас эта беседка, здесь происходили какие-то казни, вот там вот на стенде все это показано. Сейчас здесь беседка памяти. Вот на стендах показано, какие здесь стояли бараки, так сказать, где проживали люди, содержались даже, они проживали. Вот гамаки вот эти вот. Сейчас поближе подойду, покажу. Вот, друзья, по этой дорожке вот там вот находится музей. Я туда тоже не пойду еще раз. Вот там вот музей находится. В нем одно единственное помещение, в котором лишь на фотографии некоторые одежды, в которых были одеты заключенные, так сказать, которые содержались здесь. Значит, вот смотрите, да. Такое вот дело. Почему на сваях? Почему вообще в Азии на сваях строятся строения, здания? Потому что, во-первых, сезон дождей заливает очень сильно, и от ползущих ядовитых присмыкающихся гадов, так сказать, своеобразная защита. Вот этот монумент, который построили в память в 1988 году прошлого века. Более тут смотреть, друзья, совершенно ничего нету. Специально ехать сюда не нужно. Вот сюда возят школьные группы для ознакомления молодежи камбоджийской со своей историей, кровавой историей, чтобы в дальнейшем такое не повторялось. Если вы берете экскурсию в составе тюрьмы С-21, то, конечно, здесь поля смерти будут у вас включены, вас сюда привезут. Стоимость входа $3 с человека и $3 аудиогид, есть русский язык. По большому счету здесь больше смотреть ничего такого нет. У меня на канале, друзья, есть видео про кокосовую тюрьму во Вьетнаме. Там более интересно, более масштабно представлены все орудия пыток и как содержались политзаключенные. Здесь такого нет. Здесь это ничего не представлено. Здесь просто памятники, монументы. И вот прям такого ужаса, жуткого и отягощающего впечатления здесь вы не почувствуете, не найдете. Значит, смотрите, вот в этом монументе сложены черепа. Товарищ предложил мне купить цветочек и положить